Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Van Horn, one of the shareholders at Berman Fink Van Horn. I'd like to welcome everyone to our version of a 2021 breakfast briefing. As you know, we've done these for a number of years for clients, friends of the firm, and others. And we're reintroducing our breakfast briefing in kind of a hybrid format. So welcome for those of you who are able to join us in person, or those of you who are joining us virtually. We're really happy to have everybody, particularly on the heels of a pretty challenging 19 or 20 months. So it's nice to be back together again with some of our familiar faces. If you're not familiar with Berman Fink Van Horn, we're a Buckhead-based law firm of 19 lawyers, and we are an entrepreneurial firm. We represent businesses and business owners and do everything we can through the life cycle of their business to help them thrive, whether it's in dispute resolution, planning, or otherwise. And some of my law partners are here today. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to them to see if there's anything we can do to help you. But you're not here to hear from me. I want to introduce to you Gregg Simon, who is with the Senior Vice President of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and he's going to talk some about what he and the Chamber do for businesses in Georgia, and particularly the Metro Atlanta area. Gregg has been at this for quite a long time. He's got several decades of business development experience. He's been with the Metro Atlanta Chamber now for quite a few years, and before that, he worked in similar roles, both for the Atlanta Development Authority and then also in similar nonprofit organizations, both in Massachusetts and throughout New York, all with the theme of developing businesses. But I'll let Gregg tell you a little bit more about what he does and what the mission of the Chamber is, and then we'll continue our discussion about kind of the business environment in Georgia, particularly the Metro Atlanta area, some of the issues that Gregg sees that are attractive to business owners, and folks like yourselves, and how you can grow your business and continue to thrive here in Atlanta and attract new businesses to make us all better. So Gregg, with that, I'll turn it over. If you can introduce yourself and just tell the folks and the business owners what the Metro Atlanta Chamber is and what its mission is.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here in person, live. Also, welcome to our virtual guests, but it is nice to be back in in-person meetings after so long. So I'm thrilled to be here. As Chuck said, I'm with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. I've been with the Chamber for about 10 years here in Atlanta, part of the economic development team. And Chuck used the word thrive for Berman Fink Van Horn. I would use the same exact word for the Metro Atlanta Chamber. We bring the business community together to help Metro Atlanta's economy thrive. And we do that in a number of ways. So first and foremost, we're a nonprofit business organization. We have most of the major brands that are headquartered in Atlanta, not only as members of our organization, but leaders of our organization. So Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, is the current chair of our board. We've had past chairs like Jeff Sprecher, who's the CEO of Intercontinental Exchange. If you're not familiar with them, they're based in Sandy Springs. They own the New York Stock Exchange. We've had Carol Tomei, who's presently the CEO of UPS, but she was CFO of Home Depot at the time. Paul Bowers, former CEO of Georgia Power. So they're at the table, they're engaged, they create our business plan, they set the game plan, and we implement as staff. And my colleague, Kimberly Allred, is here. Kimberly, thanks for coming this morning. So within the Chamber itself, we do a number of things. We have a large public policy team, because what happens at the state capitol from a policy standpoint impacts the business community in a big way, whether it's funding for public education, K through 12, or higher education, funding for transportation, whether it's roads, bridges, or public transit, other public policy issues. They have a big impact on whether businesses choose to be located in Georgia or choose to go somewhere else. So public policy is a big part of what we do. The Atlanta Sports Council is part of our organization. They've been particularly challenged during COVID because their job is to attract major sports events like the Final Four, the Super Bowl. The big project that they're working on right now is the World Cup for 2026. We're really excited about that opportunity. But of course, when COVID hit, we had the Final Four in Atlanta and that ended up being canceled. We had the All-Star game, but that moved, but that's okay because we have the World Series. So we're back. So sports is a big part of what we do. We have a great communications team that's constantly pushing out data and information in a positive way about Metro Atlanta as a place to do business and a place to live, because recruiting talent is also a big part of what we do. And then Kimberly and I are part of our economic development team. And what that means is we're proactively calling on businesses literally around the world to promote Metro Atlanta as a place to do business. And we're calling on businesses that are already located in the region to see, is there anything that we can do to help you to be more successful and to grow and invest and add jobs in our region. And we do that in close partnership with organizations like the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Georgia Power has a really robust economic development team. And then every local economic development organization at the county and the city level. I used the word thrive earlier. That's a big theme of what we do, but collaboration is also a big theme. And so we're big on partnerships and bringing in any business or nonprofit or government organization that can help our economy to thrive. So that includes, we work closely with all the colleges and universities in the area. And then on the private side, we do a lot with the commercial real estate community, all the big brokerage firms, real estate development, who have a vested interest in bringing businesses to our region. So that's in sum, that's kind of what we do.
Okay, sounds good. So for those of you who remember, we offer breakfast briefings throughout the year, the last year and a half, a little bit of a different format. The Metro Atlanta Chamber came and spoke at one of our breakfast briefings in 2015. So over the last 6 or so years, what has been a shift, or are there any trends that you can identify? When we met in 2015, everyone was excited about Mercedes-Benz and kind of all eyes were on potential growth opportunities in Atlanta. What have we seen over the last couple of years? And was there anything you can point to that was different than what was expected?
Yes, yeah, great question. So in 2015, we had kind of just come out of the Great Recession. There were a lot of questions. Has Atlanta lost its mojo? Are other cities like Austin and Dallas and Nashville and Charlotte eating our lunch? Are they growing faster than we're growing? Are they winning more deals than we're winning? In the 6 years that have transpired since then, I would characterize those 6 years, even with COVID, as explosive growth. I'm sure you've driven around Midtown or the region. You see construction everywhere. You see cranes everywhere. Midtown has been the hottest office submarket. Our largest submarket from an office standpoint based on square footage is Central Perimeter, Dunwoody and Sandy Springs. Historically, other markets like North Fulton, Buckhead, the Cumberland Galleria have been the next biggest markets. But consistently over that 6-year period, Midtown has climbed the rungs, and now Midtown is the second largest office submarket in the region by office square footage available. And it's been, in my opinion, Georgia Tech has been the catalyst for all that. That vision that Georgia Tech had 20 years ago to go across the highway and build Tech Square, that vision, which was very risky at the time, has led to all these companies like Microsoft making an announcement. They're leasing 550,000 square feet at Atlantic Station for an Azure cloud computing center that will employ 2,000 people. And then about a month later, they announced they were buying 90 acres of land on the west side of Atlanta at Quarry Yards that will become their third largest campus outside of Redmond, Washington, and San Francisco. And then Google signs a lease for 19 floors at 1105 West Peachtree. And then we've had announcements like FanDuel creating 900 jobs at Ponce City Market. Last week, Cisco announced 700 jobs in the Coda building in Midtown. A week before that, Visa announced 1,000 jobs at 1200 Peachtree, which is the old Norfolk Southern building that they're vacating to move into their brand new headquarters in Midtown. So it's just been one announcement after another. And it's been technology companies because of Georgia Tech. It's been corporate headquarters moving here, like Papa John's moving their headquarters from Louisville to the Battery. It's been ServiceMaster moving from Memphis to Sandy Springs. And it's been financial services companies like BlackRock creating 1,000 jobs here on the Beltline at 725 Ponce, right by Ponce City Market. So just, I would characterize the last 6 years as being very positive after a period that a lot of people questioned, what direction was Atlanta headed in? And we've absolutely gone in the right direction.
That's good to hear, especially for those of us who kind of use the Atlanta business as a jumping off point for our own operations. I didn't mention this before. I apologize. For those of you who have questions, particularly those virtually, you can just submit all of the questions through the chat feature, and we'll aggregate the questions and we'll just kind of click through them at the end. For those of you who are here, if you have a question that kind of clicks right into something that Gregg's covering, please feel free to just indicate it. Otherwise, if you want to hold your question, and Gregg will tackle it at the end. So you mentioned these successes over the last 5 and 6 years, and I'm sure there's hopefully more coming. So if you can talk about what are the factors that the chamber and your groups are seeing as what is helping to cinch some of these deals? Like, what are the primary driving factors that are leading the businesses to choose Atlanta over an alternative location?
Yeah, great question. So Chuck mentioned that I spent the start of my career in New York, and specifically in Buffalo, New York. I was an economic developer. My mission was to convince businesses to move to Buffalo for 8 years. And I loved it. I learned a tremendous amount there. I have a fondness in my heart for Buffalo, still root for the Bills, but the business climate in New York is very challenging. I mean, we can talk about the weather and that sort of thing, but if you look at the business climate, things like unionization rates and property tax costs and electric rates and population decline from the region, those are what I would characterize as fundamentals. You have to have the fundamentals in place to be a positive business climate. So in Georgia, we're a right to work state. Unionization is very low. Our property tax rates are relatively low compared to other states. Yes, there are some states like Texas and Florida that have no personal income tax. We have one, 5.75%, still relatively low compared to some other states like California, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York. So we have the fundamentals in place that make us attractive and appealing from a business standpoint. But then there are additional factors that sort of give us some extra energy and reasons for businesses to come here. At the top of the list, I would put population growth. Metro Atlanta is one of the fastest growing regions of the United States. Only Houston, Dallas, and Phoenix are growing faster than Atlanta. And I would say from Phoenix standpoint, you have to look at the demographics, and I would imagine that a lot of retirees are moving to Phoenix, which are not part of the labor pool. So from a business standpoint, if a business is trying to decide where should I put this new operation, whether it's a distribution facility, manufacturing, research and development, a back office operation, a corporate headquarters, I would imagine the number one thing you would want to know is if I go to this location, I'm going to be able to hire people. I'm going to be able to hire skilled workers. I'm going to be able to pay, reasonable salaries, that it won't be astronomically high, that there will be a reasonable cost of doing business. So it's that population growth that really distinguishes Atlanta from a lot of different areas. The other thing that's been a big positive for Atlanta has been diversity, equity, and inclusion. Pretty much every single company that we're talking with these days all the companies that I mentioned, every single one of them during our conversations have in some way inquired about, we want to recruit a diverse workforce. How can we do that in Atlanta? How can you help us to do that? We want to use minority suppliers and vendors. How can we do that? Are there resources to help us to identify minority suppliers and vendors? We want to be a force for good in the community where we're located. We've seen, for example, Microsoft has a long history in the Seattle area, and there's been a lot of documented issues with the cost of living going up dramatically in Seattle. So Microsoft is saying, in Atlanta, we've learned lessons in Seattle and we want to do things differently. So I mentioned they bought 90 acres of land on the west side of Atlanta. There's a development called Quarry Yards right by the Bankhead MARTA stop. It's this 90 acres of land on a hill overlooking Midtown. The views are spectacular from up there. There's a MARTA stop right there. The new Bellwood Quarry Park, it's a 300-acre park that the city of Atlanta just opened, is adjacent to their property. But Microsoft has done a couple of really notable and interesting things. Brad Smith, who's the president of Microsoft, when he announced this, said, we're going to designate 1/4 of the acreage for affordable housing on our development. We're also going to attract a grocery store to move into our development. And Microsoft has created a program called Accelerate Atlanta, where they're partnering with the city to work with residents of the surrounding neighborhoods of Quarry Yards. There's an area called Grove Park, there's English Avenue, there's Vine City. They're working with the residents that live there to provide technology training, to give them skills that Microsoft is looking for in employees, with the intention of hiring residents that live in the community so that they won't be displaced and have to move somewhere else. So Microsoft very much sees themselves as being a force for good in the Atlanta area. And that was a very appealing factor that convinced Microsoft to come here.
Are there some other DEI-oriented initiatives around the city that are also being used to attract or increase the talent pool?
Yeah, so a few things. At our chamber, we created a plan called the ATL Plan for Racial Equity. It's on our website. We've had 248 businesses in the Metro Atlanta area sign on to it. And what it does is we've created 4 playbooks for businesses that say, we want to recruit diverse talent, but we don't know how to do that. Well, we have a playbook that we can give you that says, here are all these resources that are available. We want to use minority suppliers and vendors, but we don't know any. How can we find them? Well, here's all these resources to help you to find them. So that's on our website. I encourage everyone to check it out and become part of it. So that's something that the business community has done through our chamber. One other example that I would point to is we have a company called MailChimp. You may be familiar with, homegrown Atlanta company. Ben Chestnut founded the company here, grew it. They're over at Ponce City Market. You may have read that they're being acquired by a company called Intuit for $15 billion, which is really exciting. I'm sure very exciting for Ben Chestnut. But one really cool thing that MailChimp did as they're looking to hire technology workers is they partnered with Clayton State University, and they sent a lot of their employees over to work with the faculty at Clayton State to develop curriculum for the skills that a tech company like MailChimp needs. And they've provided adjunct professors to teach at Clayton State, and they've been hiring Clayton State students every single year. So a lot of technology companies, I would say, are looking for new ideas to tap into a pipeline of workers that is non-traditional, that they haven't used before. And we're seeing a lot of examples of that.
Okay. And so you started off by identifying population as one of the primary factors that the chamber and others use to draw or expand talent in DEI. What are some of the other factors that Atlanta still possesses that continues to outpace some of their competitors?
Sure. Well, our airport, Hartsfield-Jackson, is a huge asset. I assume most of you have had a similar experience. I've lived here for 14 years. I fly probably once a month on average. I've never had to take a connecting flight anywhere. It's been a direct flight everywhere I've gone. I can tell you my time in Buffalo, not to pick on Buffalo again, but my experience there, everywhere I went, basically, I had to connect somewhere. And it just adds, more friction on the business that you have to do. I mean, many of you have probably had business in Washington, D.C. or New York, and you can fly there for the day. You can be on an early flight in the morning, do your meetings, and then be back that same night. It just makes it really easy. So Hartsfield is a tremendous asset. The university system that we have here, as someone, a transplant to the area, I had never really thought of Atlanta as a university hub, but we have roughly 60 colleges and universities in Metro Atlanta alone, with almost 300,000 enrolled students. That makes Metro Atlanta a top 10 area in the country for enrolled college students. And then within a 250-mile radius, we have about 2 million enrolled college students that tend to gravitate towards Atlanta when they graduate. So the universities and the students is a huge attractor. The quality of life that we have here, we offer all of the amenities that you would expect in a global city, but still the cost of living and the cost of doing business is relatively low. And then just a government and governments at the state level and local levels that want to partner with business, and they want to be inviting and welcoming and open. I know, law firms often get involved in permitting issues or zoning issues with local governments. When I lived in Boston and worked in economic development there, it could take you literally 2 years to get a permit to do what you want to do. In Atlanta, in 14 days, in many cases, you can have the permits that you need to do. So there are things like that. When I say business friendly, I mean things like a fast permitting process, a straightforward and understandable permitting process. If there are issues that come up with the Department of Revenue or the Department of Labor, generally you're going to find someone that's willing to work with you and figure out a solution.
And along that way, so to turn to some things that may be challenging, what impact do you see from businesses looking to expand or come here with respect to, let's say, legislative issues, whether it's heartbeat legislation, voting rights legislation? How does that factor in? I know it gets a lot of press, but where are you seeing it in the meetings that are kind of behind closed doors?
Sure. So our organization has a long history in being involved with public policy, primarily at the state level. We do a little bit on the federal side, a little bit on the local side, primarily at the state level. And when I say long history, going back to changing the state flag in Georgia, our previous president, Sam Williams, who was our president for 17 years, was a leader in advocating for changing the Georgia flag to what it is now. And that, I didn't live here at the time. I'm told that was a very controversial issue. So we're not afraid to get involved in controversial issues if it's the right thing to do. Some things, Georgia has passed some very conservative legislation. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad or right or wrong. It's a fact. I was working on a project probably 6 years ago or so, very publicized. GE was doing a search to move their headquarters out of Fairfield, Connecticut, and they had shortlisted to Boston, New York, and Atlanta. And during that project, we had a visit from the GE team. And I do these visits probably twice a month where I have a company in town for 2 or 3 days. I take them around the region. I set up meetings with universities. I set up meetings with companies that are existing employers to give testimonials about their experience doing business here, recruiting talent. So we had a great visit plan for GE. On day 2 of the visit, our legislature passed a religious freedom bill. And during the middle of the tour, I've never had this happen to me. I've been doing this for 27 years. The leader from the GE team pulled us aside and said, we're ending the tour right now. We don't do business in a state that discriminates against people. So we ended it. They went to the airport, they flew back to Connecticut, and they put their headquarters in Boston. I can't say that's the only reason why they did that. I mean, they did not cite that as the reason that they went to Boston, but I can just tell you that's the experience that I had working on that project. And since then, the legislature passed that bill. Governor Deal vetoed that bill. So from a business standpoint, that year, our number one priority was to defeat that legislation, and we're happy that it was defeated. But there's been other legislation. You mentioned the heartbeat bill, the voting rights bill that was passed, which was very controversial. I mentioned that the industries that we're seeing predominantly are technology and financial services. And most of these companies are headquartered in San Francisco, New York, Seattle, where I would say that the political philosophies may be a little bit different than they are in Georgia. So we get a tremendous amount of questions from companies that are saying, explain the whole voting rights issue to me. Why is that not discriminatory? And we explain it, we go over it. The person we're talking to says that's logical, that's reasonable. I understand that. But now I need to explain that to my shareholders. I need to explain that to my customers. And if I go to a different state, I don't have to explain that to anyone. So I'll say that's there. And every time that these questions come up, I run to our public policy team and I'm kind of frantic and I'm like, you got to do something. You got to change this legislation. We're going to lose every project we're working on, but they keep coming. And the companies that are asking these questions, they're signing leases. I mentioned, and these are big deals. Visa, 1,000 people, Cisco, 700 people, FanDuel, 900 people. All of those companies had very specific questions about public policy. They were all concerned about it, but they all came here anyway.
And you've mentioned a few or several of these success stories, by name of companies who are coming in. Can you help folks understand, so what industries are you realizing the most traction with for the Metro Atlanta efforts?
Yeah, so I have spent a lot of time talking about office projects because probably 85% of what I work on personally is office. And I've realized I neglected all the industrial projects that are coming to the area. And it also raises a point that I forgot to mention from a geographic standpoint. I think a lot of people, when they hear Metro Atlanta Chamber, they think of us as the chamber for the city of Atlanta only. But in reality, the area that we serve is the 29 county Atlanta metro area. And that it's the Atlanta MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. The country is split into MSAs that are defined by the federal government every 10 years when the census is done. So our MSA is a pretty big area. I mean, we go all the way west to the Alabama border. We go south into Spalding and Meriwether County. We go east all the way to Morgan County to Lake Oconee. We go north into Bartow County and Forsyth County. So our region is really big. There's over 6 million people that live in the Metro Atlanta region and growing. I think particularly during COVID, everyone has been ordering Amazon a lot more and other online retailers. So we've had just explosive growth in the industrial sector. Developers can't build 1 million square foot distribution facilities fast enough. They're going up in Henry County, Coweta County, Newton County, Bartow County, all over some of these, I would say, not only suburban, but exurban, even maybe rural areas adjacent to highways. So a company will open up a distribution. Amazon has probably opened up 7 or 8 distribution facilities in Metro Atlanta alone over the last year and a half to meet the demand that they're seeing. So distribution has been huge for us. I talked a lot about technology and financial services, which it's been incredible growth. And I've been back out on the road over the last 2 months, which has been really great for me. I was in San Francisco last week. I was in Boston about a month ago, and I was in New York about 2 weeks before that. And just tremendous interest. You know, when I reach out to someone in those cities and request a meeting, everyone is interested in meeting and talking, and they're hearing about what's going on in Atlanta. And that's technology, it's financial services. Life sciences is one that's also come up lately with all of the growth of biopharmaceuticals. There needs to be more manufacturing of these treatments. A lot of that had been done across the world overseas. With COVID, there's more of an interest in bringing that back to the United States. Also with advancements in medicine. During my trip to Boston, I was talking to the head of life sciences for a major real estate firm. And he was predicting that in the future, you'll go into CVS or Walgreens and they'll do a swab in your mouth and then they'll say, come back in 2 weeks and pick up your medicine. And what that'll do is it'll drive customized medicine where you're going to need to have more manufacturing near big population centers to get this customized medicine to the people who need it in a timely fashion. So we think that life sciences is going to be a big emerging industry for us. Also, electric vehicles. You may have heard that our governor created an electric vehicle task force of business leaders, and we've brought in representatives of our chamber. And we've had wins like SK and Jackson County. They've opened up a big battery plant. If you drive I-85 north, you'll see on the right side, as you go past Gwinnett County, this enormous new factory. And that's the SK battery plant. It's under construction right now. It's almost completed. They'll have thousands of employees there making batteries. And then also, SK announced yesterday a plant out in Newton County. They'll employ about 400 people making very thin film technology for the semiconductor industry. You've heard about the chip shortages, how that's impacting the automotive industry. And so we're seeing more interest in the semiconductor industry, but that's all related to electric vehicles and automotive. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing.
So you mentioned the SK factory, returning to this idea that your mission extends beyond, just 285. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of the projects that the chamber's trying to push or has had success in that service some of the surrounding counties outside?
Absolutely.
Of what someone like me may think of as Atlanta?
Sure. So for anyone who's driven out I-20 East around Covington and Stanton Springs and Madison, if you've seen a lot of dirt moving along the highway, just a tremendous amount of development coming to that area. Years ago, we worked with, there's a life sciences company called Baxter. They're headquartered in Chicago, and they located a big plant in Newton County. Baxter divested a firm called Baxalta. Then they were bought by a company called Shire Pharmaceuticals. Then they were bought by a company called Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So now it's Takeda Pharmaceuticals in Newton County. They have about 1,500 employees in the life sciences industry. Facebook is building a data center adjacent to that. They're investing $2 billion in this data center for all of the videos and pictures that you're all posting of your dinners on Facebook. So they
or whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's called Meta now. Sorry, I forgot about that. So yeah, I would say I-20 East out in Newton County. There's a lot of development going up 75 northwest in Bartow County around the Cartersville area. I believe that there's about something like 6 million square feet of industrial space that's under development right now. I know that Chick-fil-A opened up a distribution facility up in that area. There's more on the way. That whole northwest area, I believe that the development of the battery has stimulated a lot of corporate relocations to that area. If you've seen the really big office tower next to Truist Park, and you're wondering what that is,
The elevator.
yeah, a company called ThyssenKrupp Elevator, they call themselves TKE now. It's a test tower. They have 8 shafts where they're developing new technology for elevators. And there hasn't been a lot of innovation in elevator technology. It's a box that goes up and down. But what they're doing is, if you can picture these skyscrapers, 100 stories or more, it takes a long time. It's very inefficient to get people into the office and out of the office, especially with COVID. So if you can have multiple elevators in the same shaft, one person going from the first floor to the 8th floor, another person going from the 30th floor to the 40th floor, and maybe they can also go horizontally also in addition to vertically, that could help with the efficiencies. And so using IoT technology, if the cars are talking to each other and mapping out the optimal routes to move people through the buildings, that's what they're doing in that building. Also, elevators have cables. They're developing elevators without cables right now. That will allow the elevators to go much higher, and you'll see buildings designed in a very different way in the future because of it. But my point on mentioning the battery was that's created a lot of office development in that area, and that's led to more industrial development going a little bit further northeast of that area. But then also, I don't want to forget the south side. In Fayette County, for example, Dan Cathy partnered with a British film studio called Pinewood Studios about 6 years ago or so. You may be familiar with that. They opened up Pinewood. It's an enormous film studio campus. All the Marvel movies were filmed there. A lot of other movies were filmed there. Home Depot opened up a store on the campus that's dedicated to serve that studio. Like, you can't go into that Home Depot off the street and buy something. It's for the use of Pinewood Studios and all the different sets and stages that they build there for films. What that's caused is they've built a residential development across the street, and Pinewood sold to another company called Trilla Studios. And so they've developed this neighborhood called Trilla Forest right across the street. It's a community for the cultural arts community, creative class. And you can live in a tree house there. You can live in a townhouse. You can live in a single family home. But it's really changed the demographics of Fayette County, because they were losing all the young people were going to school and leaving and not coming back. But now with the emergence of film and TV production, it's really bringing more interest and enthusiasm to Fayette County. So the south side is seeing a lot of the development also.
And it's the film and movie industry. Does that continue? Is that trend of positive action continuing despite some of the political issues we mentioned?
Yes, the entertainment industry raised a lot of concerns about the public policy and the voting rights bill, but every soundstage in Georgia is booked solid for the next 2 years. There's just so much demand for content right now that they're going like crazy, and more are being built. Out in Newton County, a new film stage studio just opened called 3 Ring Studios. In DeKalb County, there's a big, the old General Motors plant is being developed by Gray Media into studio space. So it's taken over the whole area.
So looping all the way back to where we started, we talked about the presentation that the chamber did for some of our clients back 5 or 6 years ago. What's some of the single most impactful change that you've seen over the last 6 years?
Yeah. Well, I think that I mentioned Georgia Tech. I mean, in my mind, for office development, Georgia Tech has been the catalyst, and it's been the big change to me has been the emergence of Tech Square. When I worked with Cisco, they were trying to decide whether they should put this 700 job engineering center in North Carolina or Atlanta. And there's this building called Coda in Midtown that's jointly developed by Portman Development and Georgia Tech. It's a 700,000 square foot building. And they had maybe 70,000 square feet of space available that was left. And when I was talking to Cisco, they were very interested in that building. But I was saying, well, yeah, Dakota's a great building, but there's lots of buildings in Midtown. At Atlantic Station, you have the new T3 building that's really cool. If you go into the core of Midtown on Peachtree and 14th Street, there's a lot of space available. They were adamant about the Dakota building because they said there's Georgia Tech engineers that work in this building, and that's where we want to be. Years ago, I worked with AT&T. They opened up an R&D center at 75 Fifth Street. And at the time, there was a gentleman, Ralph Della Vega, who was the CEO of AT&T Mobility. And we were looking at space on the west side. There's a building on Marietta Street called the Brickworks Building. We looked at that several times. He was adamant about being on the street level in Midtown at that Synergy building. And there was a company called Interface that makes carpeting, flooring. They were in this space, and AT&T bought out their lease because they felt that strongly that they needed a physical presence right there at Georgia Tech's campus. And Ralph would say, if I cut a hole in the ceiling, Georgia Tech engineers will fall out. And I mean, he made a joke about it. That I've heard that now from several companies, that's a big catalyst for that area.
So going back to your point then is just the talent pool generally is going to continue to drive these decisions.
Absolutely.
Are there any particular industries that Atlanta has a greater ability to attract over others?
Yeah, so I mean, I get really passionate about the tech sector. I think there's so much opportunity here for us. We've experienced a tremendous amount of growth already, but there's still more to be had. And what also really gets me excited about that is at the chamber, related to our plan for racial equity, we talk about a lot of topics like economic mobility and how can we help someone change the trajectory really of their generations of their family and create generational wealth and end this cycle of poverty. And I believe that the tech sector is a great way to do that because of examples that I mentioned with MailChimp, where they'll go in and work with Clayton State, or what Microsoft is doing with their Accelerate Atlanta program, working with residents of English Avenue, Vine City, and Grove Park to give people technology skills that they otherwise would not have had. And then all of a sudden you can take someone, give them a job at Microsoft, and the sky's the limit for where they can go. And that, I mean, that's a generational changing event, I would say, for the whole trajectory of their family. So I'm really excited about the tech sector. We've been really successful on the software side of technology. What I'm starting to see is more hardware companies coming here. And that's really interesting to me as well. I mentioned Cisco, obviously a hardware company. I see lots of opportunities in electric vehicles and semiconductors. And I think we'll be seeing more of both in the future. And what that'll do is it'll round out the whole growth of the tech sector and the types of engineers that are required of that. Georgia Tech graduates a ton of mechanical engineers and electrical engineers that have been going to California or Seattle for the jobs. But now that we're going to have more companies like Cisco here, that'll help keep some of those mechanical and electrical engineers here as well. So those are some of the opportunities that I see coming in industries.
So going back to tech, you were talking about like the flood and the demand in the Midtown area, particularly in the office area, kind of platform. We're a small test case of that. We have a lease coming up, so we've been kind of looking around town. What are you hearing from these folks as they look for office space and the feedback you're getting on the impact of COVID on either like employee attendance and, and how the businesses are forecasting their needs based on, the most recent experience of a tremendous effort of work from home?
Right. So everyone's trying to figure it out. I don't think anyone has the answer yet. Hopefully, we're coming up on the tail end of this crazy period. And different companies are reacting in different ways. We've had a lot of companies that have felt confident signing leases. I mentioned them all. I mean, Microsoft must feel pretty confident to sign a 550,000 square foot lease that people will be coming into the office and using that. Papa John's must have felt confident that people will go into their headquarters at the Battery. Cisco must have felt confident about that. So we do have, I would say, the rule is that more companies are signing leases, that they feel comfortable that people will start coming back in 2022 into the office. I would say a lot of the big brands that are headquartered here, if you're non-essential to come in, it's been remote work, waiting for children to be able to be vaccinated, I think has been a big issue. Now that that's happening, now that Merck has this pill that seems to be very effective for treating COVID, there's a lot more tools in the toolbox to treat COVID today, and there's more coming online. And that gives businesses confidence to sign leases that people will be coming back. Now, having said that, there's still some uncertainty. Some companies have put space on the sublease market. Global Payments had signed a big lease in Alpharetta. They've put, I think, about 80,000 square feet on the sublease market. Intercontinental Hotel Group in Dunwoody, Synchrony Bank. If you're not familiar with Synchrony, they had spun out of GE years ago. It's a completely online bank, but they had a pretty significant office presence up in North Fulton County. And they made a decision, we're just going to be permanent work from home. We're a virtual online bank. Why do we need to have an office for ourselves? So they put their office on, but that's the exception, not the rule, I would say. I think some companies are putting a pause on their project to sort of, let's wait another 6 months and see how things go, and then we'll feel more confident signing a lease. So that's a trend as well. But I would say that the majority, like the projects that I mentioned, are signing leases. I think a big thing that's driving that is pretty much all of those companies that I mentioned are from outside of Georgia, and they have a need now to start hiring people and have a presence. And so they just need to move forward with their plans. I am aware of some companies that one other interesting trend is during COVID, people have just on their own picked up and decided, hey, this is all virtual. My job is in Atlanta, but I always wanted to live in New Mexico. I'm going to move to Albuquerque and buy a house. And so, without telling their employer, they moved to Albuquerque, and they've been on all their Zoom meetings and haven't said a word. And now the employer is saying, hey, we want you to come back to the office. And they're saying, well, okay, guess what? I live in Albuquerque now. Are you going to give me a relocation package to come back to the office? That's, believe it or not, that's come up. And so there's these interesting things that companies have to deal with. And I think the gut reaction to that would be, no, we're not going to give you your relocation package. But then the company says, well, wait a minute, there's this employee shortage, we're having trouble recruiting talent. Maybe we do need to, think of something different now.
But it sounds like the long-term vision for a lot of these companies, they're forecasting much beyond like a COVID-related pandemic,
Yes.
like runway, right? They're looking
Yes.
much more long-term.
Absolutely.
Is there anything from a lot of these different data points, anything that you can draw to pass along to the folks here today to kind of keep an eye out for 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, I would say two things on that. Number one other point I forgot to mention that I should have mentioned would be, I talk a lot about big businesses, but what's the impact on smaller businesses? What's the opportunity? When all these companies, Microsoft, Visa, Cisco, they're hiring hundreds, if not thousands of people. They're going to need to use a lot of vendors and suppliers and interact with smaller businesses on a variety of things. So that creates opportunities for smaller businesses in the area. At our chamber, we created a program several years ago called Backed by ATL, where we open it up to small businesses to apply to be part of a cohort of about 10 businesses that go through a year-long program where we bring in some of our bigger brand members to provide mentoring to the smaller businesses. We open up opportunities for funding for venture capital for these companies. And then in some cases, some of the bigger brands are investing in some of the smaller companies, and that's been a very successful effort. So I didn't want to end this without talking about how the opportunities for small businesses and how we're helping them also. But two things I want to mention about looking forward. We have a big election next week for the mayor of the city of Atlanta. I think that whoever the new mayor is, that will have a big impact on the business community. And then a year from next week, we'll have an election for governor, and that will also have a big impact. And so elections matter. I think from the chamber, we would say we encourage everyone to go out and vote. We don't take a position, we don't endorse candidates, but we want everyone to vote. And, you know, the leaders of communities and states make a big difference on the success or the failure of communities.
Are there any questions from the folks here or any of the folks online? Please feel free to key any of your online questions into the chat, and we can get an opportunity to speak directly to Gregg before we kind of pivot towards a wrap up. You talked about a lot of these factors: universities, location, talent, DEI. Are there any takeaways then for existing business owners that you could pass along that, you know, some of the newer businesses, like kind of some of the new ideas they may be bringing to the table that you could pass along?
Well, I think, you know, as someone who's been in economic development in Atlanta now for 14 years, and the first 4.5 of that or so was with the Atlanta Development Authority, which is the city of Atlanta's economic development agency. At the city, we would, you know, ponder, we have these economically challenged neighborhoods. You know, what can the city do from a policy standpoint? How can we breathe life into Metropolitan Parkway or Campbellton Road? And the Beltline certainly is a catalyst for investment all throughout the city because it touches almost every single neighborhood. But then with development, that creates issues and challenges in itself of gentrification. And if you have someone that's lived in that community for a very long time, and then the property values go up and they can't afford to live there anywhere, and they move, you know, to a different location, is that solving the problem, or is that just kicking the can down the road? And I would argue that it's kicking the can down the road, and there's got to be very intentional ways to solve those problems. And we're seeing some of that with the examples I mentioned with Microsoft and MailChimp in our Atlanta Plan for Racial Equity. And I would just encourage small businesses, big businesses, businesses of all shapes and sizes and industry, you know, to think differently than you've been thinking in the past. And, you know, when our economy thrives for all the residents of Metro Atlanta, that's going to bring more success and to everyone's business in the area. And there's a lot of ways to go about doing that. And we've literally created a roadmap of how to do that on our website. So that's how I would answer that.
Okay. Are there any online questions you want to bring in?
You touched on one that was submitted about the industries in particular that Atlanta's been attracting. So,
Patrick, you had a...
Yeah, Gregg, you hit on all the different areas of Atlanta. One area you didn't hit on was downtown. And I know as everybody's flocked to Midtown and Buckhead and Perimeter and Alpharetta and Galleria, I mean, it's sucked out of Buckhead. And then I started my career in the mid-90s, and that was the epicenter of business in the Southeast. And it's just so lively. Are there any plans to try to rejuvenate downtown?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I should have mentioned downtown. And I've been working downtown for the last 14 years. Our office is downtown. And yeah, downtown is kind of, from an office standpoint, office appeal, it has not seen the success that other submarkets have seen. I think that's about to change. We have several developments of regional impact downtown that I would point to. First and foremost would be the redevelopment of the Gulch. If you've been hearing about that, reading about that, for anyone who doesn't know what the Gulch is or was, adjacent to State Farm Arena and Mercedes-Benz Stadium, there is an area that's below grade that was a rail yard that was owned by Norfolk Southern. And Norfolk Southern sold it to a developer called CIM, which is based in Los Angeles. They developed the Staples Center and the area around it in Los Angeles, if you're familiar with that. They will be building up to 6 million square feet of mixed use development downtown adjacent to the State Farm Arena and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They will have office space, hotels, apartments, condos, retail. They're partnering with the Atlanta Hawks to do this. So it'll be a whole new entertainment district downtown for when you're going downtown for an event or a conference. It'll essentially be like the Battery having that downtown. I'm really excited about that. It's a well-funded, experienced developer that's done this before. I mean, that's going to take 20 years to develop the Gulch. It's a major, major development. They have to build, I mentioned it's below grade. They have to construct a platform to connect it back into the framework of the city and streets and roads. They're working on that right now, but that's going to happen. Just to the east of that, you have a developer called Newport out of Germany that's bought about 25 buildings south of downtown, most notably 222 Mitchell Street. If you're familiar with that, that's being renovated right now. There's an area called Hotel Row that they're bringing restaurants into. That's going to be really cool. And then if you go a little bit east of that, by the old Turner Field, that's now owned by Georgia State and their football stadium, they've partnered with Carter. They've rebranded it as Summerhill. And there's already been a tremendous amount of development there with apartments and restaurants. They've built some new Georgia State facilities there, more coming. I think those developments will be game changers for downtown, will make it much more appealing from an office standpoint and from an economic standpoint, cost, because Midtown has been so successful, the office rental rates are really high. I mean, to lease in the Coda building, they're probably in the upper 50s to low 60s per square foot. Downtown, you could get great office space in the mid 20s per square foot. So from a economic standpoint, there's a strong case to be made for downtown.
Any other questions from anybody? Jill, were there any other that we haven't already covered?
There's one that just came in as. Oh, it's about traffic and congestion. The new development going on and the motivation to moving to the new developments and considerations for traffic and new developments.
Yeah, so when I was here in 2015, if that question probably did come up then, although I don't specifically remember, but I wouldn't have had a good answer to that question in 2015. But the next year in 2016, the legislature increased the excise tax in Georgia when you buy gasoline. And that's added $1 billion annually to the Georgia Department of Transportation budget. And that's allowed the state to invest. They focused on our highways and bridges so far. So, you've seen the construction at 400 and 285 in Central Perimeter. That has been the most congested node in our network, and it's being completely rebuilt right now. You've also seen the emergence of reversible lanes and hot lanes with the transponder that you can have, the Peach Pass, that's moving people through the area quicker. You've seen the implementation of diverging diamond interchanges, like at Ashford Dunwoody Road, and I think there's one at Jimmy Carter in 85, where it gets you on and off the highway faster by moving you to the wrong side of the road, which can be a little daunting the first time you do it, but then you get used to it. So it's more efficient to get people on and off the highway. So you've seen the investments that have already occurred and are occurring in our roads and bridges. Then there's the expansion of public transit. Governor Deal in his last year signed legislation to create the ATL, which is a regional public transit network that ultimately will allow MARTA to partner with some of the surrounding counties. We've seen Gwinnett County have referendum on expanding public transit. Unfortunately, it's been voted down twice. We're really hopeful that they're going to have a third vote and that it will be passed. Cobb County is having a lot of conversations about public transit in Cobb. So I think it'll take a while, but we're really optimistic about the future growth of public transit and the positive impact that'll have on reducing traffic in the area. But I would also say that the investments that you've already seen and more that you will see in the highway system will also alleviate traffic.
Any other questions from the folks here? Otherwise, we may start wrapping up. Gregg, we really appreciate all your time, the insights on what you and your team are doing. Hopefully those of you in attendance, both virtually and in person, found it really informative and invigorating to know that there's an organization out there that's doing their best to make existing businesses and new businesses thrive in Atlanta. We really thank you for your time. And thank you for attending. We're very excited to kind of get back into the routine of doing in-person sessions. It's great to see in the flesh people again, and just to kind of chit chat and just talk about what everyone's up to. So again, thank you for your participation. Thanks for the energy. If we could give Gregg a thank you for coming, and go Braves.
Go Braves.